Good evening, afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Sydney Yeager. I'm the public programs producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's class on Arthur Szyk. This is the first class in our series commemorating his 130th birthday. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you so much for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able to, you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. You can learn more on our website and buy tickets there as well. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speaker during the program, we're going to ask that you please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, so not the Zoom chat, the Q&A box, and we're going to get to as many as we can near the end of the program. Today, we are so honored to be joined by Irvin Ungar. Irvin is the world's foremost expert on the art of Arthur Szyk and the tireless force behind the Szyk Renaissance. A former pulpit rabbi fluent in Jewish history and tradition, Irvin is the CEO and founder of Historicana, an antiquarian book firm and small publishing house of Szyk imprints. Beginning in 1987, he first specialized in Szyk's remarkable illustrated books and quickly expanded his repertoire to include original art, fine art prints, and other important Szyk works. He has curated and consulted for numerous Szyk exhibitions at major institutions worldwide. He is also the author of Arthur Szyk, Soldier in Art, and Justice Illuminated, The Art of Arthur Szyk. His most recent book, Arthur Szyk Preserved Institutional Collections of Original Art, was published in 2023. Additionally, Irvin is the co-producer of the documentary film Soldier in Art, Arthur Szyk, and the publisher of the luxury limited edition of the Szyk Haggadah, excuse me. He also served as the curator of the Arthur Szyk Society and his traveling exhibition program, and continues lecturing and speaking about Szyk on university campuses, museums like this one, and other venues around the world. His memoirs on his life with Arthur Szyk have been accepted by a major university press and will be forthcoming. So you can buy some of the books that I mentioned at the link in the chat. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us. And now I'm going to hand things over to Irvin. And Irvin, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sydney, for your kind introduction, and good evening, everyone, or good afternoon if you're here in California or in the Western states. I am really, truly honored to deliver these lectures for the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, in a city in which Arthur Szyk lived between the war years of 1940 and 1945. So what are these 4 lectures about? These talks are about more than telling you who the Polish Jewish artist Arthur Szyk was, and more than showing you what his artworks look like, and more than explaining and interpreting the seemingly apparent messages, themes, and context behind them. These presentations, at their very core, are about the essence of the man himself, what he has taught us about Jewish history, about European and American history, about world history, and about his people and humanity at large, with an eye toward the present, keeping in mind that Szyk once said, "I create my art for permanence," believing that one day he might have an audience such as you in 2024, 130 years after his birth, coming to terms with his art. Though Arthur Szyk died in 1951, when I was almost 3 years old, I've been privileged to have lived with him for the past 35 years through my research, meeting with those who knew him, and my close relationship with his daughter, Alexandra Szyk Bracey, for the last 3 decades of her life. It is because of that journey and kinship that I have felt with Arthur Szyk that each of these presentations is really personal for me. Never before in my hundreds of Szyk talks have I had an opportunity to string together 4 different thematic public presentations in a single series to offer a more inclusive overall picture of the great art and the great messages, with ample opportunity to dwell adequately about the great man behind them. It's an absolute treat that's deeply treasured in this precious moment. In 1940, while en route from Great Britain to live permanently in the United States, Szyk resided briefly in Canada for 3 months. Within weeks of his July arrival, newspapers hailed him as the great Polish painter, whose works had been shown all over Europe since the time, as his wife was quoted in the article as saying, when he was the chief of the counter-propaganda department for Poland in its war against the Bolsheviks following World War I. But it is to the opening remarks made by the Consul General of Poland in Canada in 1940 at a Szyk exhibition in Toronto that I would like to turn as a way of introducing you, as the consul said to his audience, to Arthur Szyk himself, the artist as revealed by his works. In essence, Consul Victor Podolsky wished to introduce us to the soul of Arthur Szyk, as he went on to say, when studying the beauty and the greatness of the exhibition, you will have sight of the inner world of the artist. You will learn of his amazing knowledge of history and nations, races and personalities, of his meticulous thoroughness, his originality, his psychology, his unusual memory, his profound knowledge of human nature, and last but not least, of the spirit which has animated his works. An example of what Podolsky captured in his words can be seen in a contemporary artwork for love of man and nature, referencing Poland, painted by the artist shortly after his arrival in Canada. The context of this painting is exactly 1 year earlier, when Germany invaded Poland, and Canada, within 8 days of that, declared war on Germany. Szyk's illuminating text in English and French tell us more about the man than the artwork itself. Love for man and nature has been my guide, Szyk writes. To the Canadian people of today, men and women of tomorrow, who will, in the dawn of that tomorrow, help to mold a better and happier world than we have known. This study of the strenuous and noble efforts of great Canadians is dedicated. Let ardent love for freedom, undaunted courage, and loyalty of the sons of Poland, martyred country of mine, be their inspiration forever. And here we have a glimpse of what the consul meant by having insight into the spirit which animates Szyk's works. And while the consul's words and this artwork may well serve as a prologue for this presentation, there are 2 other artworks at the outset that can serve our agenda for understanding the man Szyk, the great Polish painter, the great artist Arthur Szyk, the champion of his people, and the world-famous and world-renowned Arthur Szyk. For this is how he was known in his lifetime, as the great painter, the great illuminator, the world-renowned Szyk. Let an artwork from 1928, which I'll show in a moment, of the early 9th century European ruler Charlemagne, and a story about a Berlin museum from 2005, and a specific work of art exhibited there, serve as 2 distinct and diverse, more formal examples of what the Consul General had in mind, but had no knowledge of. First, Charlemagne. In my most recent book, Arthur Szyk Preserved Institutional Collections of Original Art, I selected an illumination housed at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris Charlemagne and Jewish scholars as the opening image, because it set the stage up front to educate the observer of what kind of a man Szyk was, and from which all of his art flows. First, the illuminated text, and then what Szyk wanted us to know about him and what he wanted to teach us. Within the artwork itself, painted during the 1920s decade that Szyk lived in Paris, he calligraphs in French just below the large letter C of Charlemagne. He calligraphs the following. This image is gifted to the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris by Arthur Szyk, illuminator of Paris and Guernsey, on April 19th, 1928. The additional text on the sides and toward the bottom in Szyk's hand, in Polish, French, German, English, Hebrew, and Latin, reads, Charlemagne engages Jewish savants to found a university at Montpellier and sends Rabbi Kalonymus de Luca to Mayence and Rabbi Mechir from Babylon to Narbonne to occupy the post of instructors. In essence, Szyk wants us to know about a little-known event in the early Middle Ages of a Christian king who employs Jews to disseminate worldly and secular knowledge in Western and Central Europe. And further, Szyk wants to make clear that this artwork is done by a Jew, as he inscribes within the illuminated manuscript in the lines at the very top in 4 languages, to my French co-religionists in Hebrew, Liachei HaYehudim HaTzarfatim, I dedicate this image. To quote my co-author of Arthur Szyk Preserved, my colleague Alison Claire Chang, and I quote, this remarkable historical collaboration of a Holy Roman Emperor, a Christian ruler, and several learned rabbis mirrored Szyk's personal aspiration to serve the greater good through his dual identity as an unassimilated Jew and as a multicultural, multilingual pan-European. In this work, he affirmed that it is possible, even desirable, for Jews or people of any belief or ethnicity to be cosmopolitan citizens of the world and hold several non-competing political allegiances at once. In essence, then, Szyk is teaching us that we can be both a nationalist and a universalist, with even multinational allegiances, as he held nationalist feelings for several countries and peoples, for Poland, land of his birth, for the Jewish people and Israel, and for America, all while serving as an advocate for humanity. During my travels last summer, I visited the Bibliothèque Nationale and had the amazing opportunity in an awesome setting to hold Charlemagne and Jewish scholars in my hands, likely its first visitor from outside the National Library staff in almost 100 years. Honestly, I felt like I discovered a long-lost manuscript, bringing it to life while feeling the transcendent magic of Szyk's hand in mine. The library's curator explained to me that the various markings, which are likely not legible here, but are handwritten and stamped on the artwork, indicated that over time it had been placed within different library collections by the staff, switching its location from the Hebrew and Judaica department to its illuminated manuscripts section. This is by way of symbolically saying that Szyk's art fits comfortably across both the Jewish world and the secular world, and is treasured by both. And now, to move from Paris to Berlin. It was 2005, and as I planned a trip to Poland, where I would be traveling a Szyk exhibit to 3 cities and also lecturing at those venues, I decided to schedule a short visit to Berlin, thinking to myself how amazing it would be if this anti-Nazi artist would one day have a major exhibition there in the heart of Germany. Now that, I thought, that would really be something. So in advance of my visit, I'd sent off about 30 inquiries to museums and related institutions to see if I could schedule a meeting somewhere, but I got no responses. So upon my arrival in Berlin, I set off for the IMP building of the Deutsches Historisches Museum, as I wanted to see its modern architecture edition, designed for contemporary exhibitions, and visit the older Zeughaus, the Armory building, which is on the right, with its permanent collections. And this being a history museum, that was where I decided to go as my first visit in Berlin for the 2 days that I was there. As I stood in front of the historic building, whose facade felt like the Metropolitan in New York, I said to myself, this is where I will have a Szyk exhibition in Berlin. No kidding. I really said that to myself. What I didn't know at the time was that the German Historical Museum was the most important museum in Germany. And believe me, this is not the way in which people go about proposing exhibitions, just showing up out of the blue. In any case, once at the welcome desk in the lobby of the Pay building, I asked if I could see someone in the director's office. Who are you? The woman asked. And I told her my name and that I was from California and I wanted to show the director something. I was asked to take a seat and wait 15 minutes, and that maybe somebody would come down to meet with me and chat for a few minutes. Well, after exactly 15 minutes, I went back to the desk to inquire again. And then 5 minutes later, the receptionist's jaw dropped as she called out to me that the director, Dr. Hans Ottermeyer, will speak with me on the phone. Obviously, not a normal occurrence for a drop-in visitor. I gathered myself together and said, holy moly, I have only 2 sentences to convince this man to meet with me in his office. And then he said, come up, I'll meet with you. And once in his presence, it became clear that he held the most important position of history and arts in Germany, and that he was personally schooled in all knowledge of German and European history, personally schooled in just every aspect of it, from the Renaissance to the present day. Yes, he asked as we sat down at a round table. And then I took out a spiral-bound booklet from my backpack that I had prepared of Szyk reproductions for just such an occasion, never traveling anywhere without any Szyk art of some kind. And I placed it in front of him. And then he went like this, just like that. He went down and he glanced up. And within a split second, he said, this is great art. Who is this artist? And I said, he's Arthur Szyk. And he said, well, has he ever exhibited in Germany? And I said, oh, no, sir. One of the things I mentioned to you on the phone is that he was the leading anti-Nazi artist in America during World War II. He never would have exhibited in Germany. And then he called in his assistant, who came in, a head curator at the museum, and he showed them the art. And they said, we should have this art in our next exhibition on Kunst und Propaganda. And I went like, oh my God, I'm off the street for almost 30 minutes. And here the German Historical Museum is entertaining, showing Szyk in their next exhibition. And then he said, no, we should have an exhibition of your artist by himself, he said to me. And then he went into his pocket and he pulled out something which I realized was a pocket calendar. And he said, we should have an exhibit of your artist. And in 2008, in the fall of 2008, he says to me, we should have an exhibit. Can you get me a proposal? And I said, oh, yes, sir. You know, just like somebody would say to their commanding officer. I couldn't believe it. As I said, I was out in the street literally 30 minutes ago, and now the German Historical Museum was considering an Arthur Szyk exhibition. After 30 days, I received an email from Dr. Ottermeyer in response to my proposal. It read, the Deutsches Historisches Museum will hold an exhibition of your artist in the IMP building in 500 square meters. That's 5,000 square feet, in the fall of 2008. And so, 3 years later, with well over 200 objects exhibited featuring 76 works of art borrowed from 15 private collections and 9 institutions worldwide, the German Historical Museum put on an amazing show. It would be reviewed from Cuba to Korea, from Mexico to Madrid. It would be on TV stations throughout Germany, and TV and radio stations from Berlin to Bavaria, and on the front pages of the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune. In August 2008, I attended the opening with family and friends. Szyk's daughter, Alexandra, in her elegant blue cobalt dress, sitting near me on one side in the front row, and Dr. Ottomeyer next to me on the other. The opening was standing room only, TV cameras positioned, press photographers everywhere, and musicians from the Polish embassy were playing on stage music of a Holocaust survivor with Szyk's art in the background, all witnessed by Germans, Poles, and Jews gathered together to celebrate the nationalist and universalist artist activist Arthur Szyk. I remember pinching myself. It was a moment for the ages. And here is the point that I wish to make by telling you this story. At the reception, Dr. Ottomeyer turned to me, and while reflecting on this 3-year journey to create an exhibition that he was incredibly proud of and felt important for his country, he said to me, "Here we are, me, a German from Berlin, and you, a rabbi from California, and I feel like we're standing on the same bridge. And that bridge is the bridge of Arthur Szyk." And when I asked Dr. Ottomeyer why he had ever taken the phone call and invited me up to his office, he explained to me that he had just had a cancellation of an appointment a few moments before, and he thought to himself, as he told me, no one has ever walked into the German Historical Museum from California and said that he wants to show me art. Had you been from Germany or Poland, I never would have called down to the reception desk. Why not, he thought. And hence, the rest is now history. And to this day, he and I remain friends. And there is yet another chapter to this story, as I wish to make a second point about my Berlin narrative. And it is here in a moment that I will show you a second work of art suggested earlier in my talk. 3 months after the German Historical Museum opening, I returned to Berlin to film German high school students and to record their thoughts and their actions as they interacted with the exhibit for a full-length documentary that I hope to make one day. The Germans went all out again, this time busing in approximately 120 students for my planned visit, many coming from far away as 3 hours to the east in what was once East Germany. And as a group of those students gathered around me in the exhibition, I remember distinctly standing in front of Samson in the Ghetto, showing a Warsaw Ghetto resistance fighter who was holding up a broadside ordering the extermination of the ghetto Jews. I explained the image and then read Szyk's inscription around the border. And if you look in the lower left, you'll see the beginning of the inscription, which reads, "To the German people, sons of Cain, be ye damned forever and ever. Amen." I wasn't certain how the students would react, but without hesitation, I asked them how that statement made them feel. The immediate response of 2 students are as clear to me today as they were then, as they seemingly echoed in one voice. This does not make us feel guilty, but it does make us feel responsible. responsible that something like this should, like something like the Holocaust, should never happen again. For me, it indeed was a wow-type moment. Then and there, I came to appreciate the impact and emotion and what was at the very core of showing Szyk's art in Berlin. Did their response mean that every German student felt this way? No. Did it mean that every Polish student, every high school student feels this way? No. Did it mean that every American or Jewish student feels a sense of responsibility toward preventing human tragedy visited upon a people because of racism and hatred? No. Did it mean that never again really meant never again? What that moment meant to me was that art has the power to engage, to stimulate important and necessary dialogue and discussion, and that Szyk's art is as timely in our age as it was in his. For after all, for whom was Szyk in 1945 painting these words painstakingly around the border? The answer? For young Germans, 2 generations removed from their grandparents, who would one day be standing in front of his art at the German Historical Museum. And why? So that they would come to terms with the urgency and sense of responsibility to rise up to the challenges facing them in their own generation. Art is not my aim, said Arthur Szyk. It is my means. I would like to return now to Szyk's time in 1920s Paris, a period I referenced earlier when I highlighted his 1928 Charlemagne painting. To be clear, he lived there from 1921 until 1933, moving there after serving in the Polish army, both as an enlisted soldier and as an officer, and afterwards as its director of art propaganda. But here, I would like to focus on the year 1927, on something that he wrote then, which will again tell us about the man Szyk and also the art which flowed from him. Among Szyk's personal papers and archives, which I once owned, now residing at the Magnus Collection of Jewish Art and Life at UC Berkeley, was his 1927 diary, meticulously written by him in beautiful Russian script. I would like to call your attention to one page from the end of October, because I believe this important and moving entry marked a dramatic shift in how Szyk saw himself in the world as he wrote. And I hope everyone can see this on their screen. This month of October passed quite well, since work has helped me to subsume daily problems. I am very pleased. Work is progressing successfully. In 3 months, I hope to have it, the Statute of College, completed. And then we could finally be getting away for living carefree and enjoying things as moving more. I am writing these lines in a very cheerful mood, since an atmosphere of a great master is being created around me, and this is much dearer to me than my life. I am mortal, and let my productions become immortal to the glory of my beloved motherland, Poland. Here again, Szyk shows his nationalist feelings for Poland, which were, of course, invigorated the year before by Józef Pilsudski's uprising in 1926, which temporarily led to a more favorable conditions for Jews in Poland, meaning, in essence, for Szyk, Jews do better if Poland does better. Or to say it another way, Szyk could feel better as a Pole because he could feel better about his being a Jew there. But this is not what I wish to concentrate on here, but rather on his words. The atmosphere of a great master is being created around me. That is, the atmosphere of my house is changing to an atmosphere of the house of a master. I truly believe that Szyk saw himself not only as a master artist, but a great master, wanting to restore and enhance the glory of Polish arts and culture in the world, aspiring to the heights equal to what Leonardo da Vinci did in his world and a Michelangelo in his. Consider the fact that Szyk excelled and was unique in three fields: in religious art, in book illustrations, and in satirical and political art. To my mind, there is no one artist who excelled in all three of these with the sophistication and genius which he did. And indeed, from Szyk's words did his art flow. Two works of art here, both bearing dates of 1927, shall illustrate my point, as I attempted to do with Charlemagne earlier. First, Le Scribe. The scribe recalls for us the words of the Polish consul, who spoke about the inner world of the artist, about his originality, his psychology, and the spirit which animated his works. Here, Szyk challenges us to confront the world of the Renaissance, bumping up against the modern world. His scribe in Renaissance dress, with a modern fountain pen in his hand, drafts on parchment a philosophical text in German. Over his shoulder, modern transportation featuring an airplane and train travel near a 17th or 18th century French or German tapestry, above which, to the top right, are biblical cherubs with Szyk's self-portraits, smoking pipes, flanking the almighty crowned US dollar, below which is a Cubist Picasso self-portrait, signed by Picasso, but it is a Szyk original. As an aside, Szyk telling us if he wanted to paint like Picasso, he could. Szyk's art begs us to come to terms with it and the world in which we live as we witness dramatic shifts and changes as one generation bumps up against the next new generation. A second work of art I want to address here is really a body of work. His Statute of Kalisz, a series of 45 paintings referenced in his October diary entry, writing that he hoped to complete it, that is the statute, within 3 months, which he did in 1928. As you can see on the far right, Szyk dedicated it to the Polish statesman Józef Pilsudski. What is the Statute of Kalisz? These statutes were civil and religious privileges granted to the Jews of Poland in the town of Kalisz by Boleslav the Pious in 1264, later affirmed by Polish rulers such as Casimir the Great, who is shown here on the throne. In the next image in the center, we see those privileges confirmed upon Jews as symbolized by the Jewish notables standing before him in the foreground. What Szyk wanted to emphasize in this illuminated manuscript was the mutual cooperation and the beneficial relationship that existed between Poles and Jews over the centuries, calling attention to what Jews have contributed to Polish society. For example, as the minters of the first Polish coins, incidentally with Hebrew letters, under Mieszko III in 1181, as physicians appearing before the 16th century Polish king Sigismund Augustus in Krakow to heal his queen consort Barbara Radziwiłł, and as Jews serving in its armies such as Berek Yasilevich in 1794, a patriot and hero of the Kosciuszko uprising. Why all of this by Szyk in the late 1920s? That is, to demonstrate, amidst a climate of rising anti-Semitism in Europe, the case that countries which empower their Jewish minorities with the rights and privileges to which they are entitled these countries can indeed benefit from its Jewish populations. The result, 14 cities in Poland hosted exhibitions of Szyk statues in 1932, sponsored by the Polish government. Imagine, 1 year before Hitler comes to power in Germany, an attempt is made by the Polish government to build closer bonds between Poles and Jews on the eve of World War II through Szyk's art. Have you read or heard about this narrative in any books on Jewish history? And then consider the artwork itself. The Statute of Kalish, to my way of thinking, is Szyk's greatest illuminated historical manuscript, paralleling his greatest illuminated religious text, that of the Haggadah. Another way in which Szyk attempted to demonstrate his loyalty to Poland in the late 1920s and early 30s, while emphasizing his being a Jew with an eternal commitment to the Jewish people, can be seen in the juxtaposition of this photograph and illustration. On the left, in 1933 Lodz, Szyk sits with Polish comrades, but note that almost in secret code, he signals to the viewer that he is a Jew among Poles. For across his chest, we see him intentionally placing his hand with 3 fingers showing over his heart, perhaps forming horizontally the Hebrew letter Shin, the first letter of Szyk. But my interpretation of this symbolism, however, or secret signaling, if you will, goes beyond this and makes sense to me when viewed next to his illustrated self-portrait and its context. For on both sides of his medallion near his ears are the coats of arms of 2 Polish cities to which he's paying allegiance. Lvov, now Lviv, on the left, the sponsoring city of his Haggadah, and Lodz, on the right, city of his birth. While in Hebrew, along the bottom of the medallion, we see Szyk pledging allegiance to the Jewish people with the Hebrew inscription, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. And with his right hand, over his heart, showing 3 fingers. And more about the man Szyk, addressing his amazing knowledge of history and nations, races and personalities, in addition to the art of building relationships and bridges between Germans and Jews, as in the Berlin narrative, or the building of bridges between Poles and Jews, as through his statutes of Kalish. As you look now at as we're about to look now, at some of his portraits of subjects spanning 3 millennium, keep in mind that within each, Szyk's mantra presides: art is not my aim, it is my means. His biblical subjects include Moses the lawgiver, pictured as a leader in physical defense of his people. In the heroine of Judith, King David, and Queen Esther, we are drawn to their zeal on behalf of their Israelite brethren. In Szyk's ancient historic Jewish and non-Jewish figures, we meet Hillel the sage and Bar Kokhba the warrior, and saints George, Anthony, and Patrick. Szyk's deep interest in European history and culture, in addition to Charlemagne and Casimir the Great referenced earlier, is revealed again in Jewish and non-Jewish portraits and personages, from philosophers, Moses Maimonides, which is now on exhibit at the museum as the Center for Jewish History in New York, I believe. He also, and these personages that he illustrated included most Jewish personages, included not only Maimonides, but Baruch Spinoza. to codifiers and commentators, Joseph Caro and Isaac Abravanel, to national heroes as varied as 15th century Joan of Arc, 17th and 18th century Peter the Great of Russia, and 16th century Queen Elizabeth I of England, painted by Szyk as a tribute to their nations as allies of America against the Nazis. And note the World War II fighter airplanes that are in their backgrounds. His art celebrated historical figures from Doña Gracia Mendez Nasi, who used her fortune to rescue Jews from the Inquisition in Portugal, to the great Winston Churchill. Too many, too numerous are the index and inventory of the figures in world history with whom Szyk was familiar, that we can only begin to touch the surface within this presentation. Yet, there is one portrait among Szyk's pantheon that's worthy of explication and decoding here, and by doing so, we may learn more about the spirit which animated his works. It is that of the Polish military engineer Tadeusz Kościuszko, who came to America to serve in George Washington's army and fight for American independence. Szyk celebrates the success of this American Revolutionary War hero, who was promoted to the rank of brigadier general at war's end by the Continental Congress. His achievements included the construction of key fortifications, including West Point, which is pictured in the background. However, it is not the engineering and military success which is featured as the central element in this portrait. It is rather the very document in Kościuszko's hand that Szyk wishes to emphasize and elevate to importance. And what is it? It is the general's last will and testament. What is in it? In it, Kościuszko, who earned over $15,000 for his years of military service to America, bequeaths his pay to his good friend Thomas Jefferson so that he might use it to purchase the freedom of his slaves. The will states, I hereby authorize my friend Thomas Jefferson to employ the whole thereof in purchasing Negroes from among his own or any other and giving them liberty in my name. Szyk, knowing and understanding Kościuszko's story from 1798, used this historical detail to deliver a 140-year-old message to the peoples of Europe and America in 1938 regarding the enslavement of minorities in their own time. Upon researching this painting, I learned that in addition to emancipating his own serfs in Poland and insisting on the maintenance of a school for their education, Kościuszko had formed the first Jewish legion in modern times to fight in the Kościuszko uprising against the partition of Poland in 1794. Szyk's spirit not only animates his works, but has the power to animate its viewers. As such, 5 years after his completion of the Kościuszko painting, Szyk pursued the same theme of Black equality while simultaneously addressing attitudes toward full Jewish equality in this country, as seen in this 1943 illustration of the Black, White, and Jew. Notice the Star of David on the far right on the Jew, of the Black, White, and Jew in common cause. This was done for an anti-discrimination poster commissioned by New York Governor Thomas Dewey, who created the first state law in this country that prohibited racial discrimination in employment. When Szyk was asked the year before, in 1942, in a newspaper interview, if he did not have to create art to fight the Axis and work toward the rescue of European Jewry, what might he turn his attention to? And he responded to the journalist that after the war, and I quote, only time will tell what my new mission will be It may be complete Negro enfranchisement and social equality. Who knows? This is a subject dear to my heart, end quote. This is Arthur Szyk, advocate for humanity. From the League of Nations, where he was invited to Geneva as the only artist in the world to illuminate its charter, to the Visual History of Nations series, celebrating the best that each nation has uniquely contributed to humanity over the centuries, Szyk's universal outlook worked toward the betterment of mankind. And as he advocated for humanity, whereby he emphasizes the best that world civilization has to offer, his art has the power and the precision to attack the heart of evil which exists in the world and the chaos which surrounds it. Here, Szyk's pair of pen and ink drawings, with their powerful Gothic quality, compel us to look deeper and deeper at evil, at death and destruction. His drawing on the left, echoing the composition of Albrecht Dürer's woodcut of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, while the Ride of the Valkyries from his Nibelungen series makes sport of the Nazi infatuation with Wagner and Scandinavian mythology, as the screaming Valkyries, armed with guns, daggers, and bombs, plunge into battle for their Führer. Famous 1940s art critic Thomas Craven wrote that Szyk's designs are, as I quote, as compact as a bomb, extraordinary lucid in statement, firm and incisive of line, and deadly in their characterizations, creating an immortal record of inhuman conduct and organized savagery. His art, he continues, is compelled by the highest dictates of his conscience to express his horror of butchery and ruin, of spiritual corruption and systematic evil, end quote. And while we absorb these images, let us now view this pair of paintings of dictators, which appeared on the covers of Collier's magazine. Here we can understand why the 1940s American editor and author Carl Van Doren would write about Szyk, and I quote, "There is no one whose World War II art is more certain to be alive 200 years from now. Just as we turn back to Hogarth and Goya for the living images of their age, so our descendants will turn back to Arthur Szyk for the most graphic history of Hitler and Hirohito and Mussolini. Here is the damning essence of what has happened. Here is the piercing summary of what men have thought and felt," end quote. In our day, in conjunction with the exhibition, The Art and Politics of Arthur Szyk in 2002 at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, its then chairman, Rabbi Irving Yitz Greenberg, wrote, and I quote, "Not only is Szyk the role model of the engaged artist, but he represents the artist as witness against evil," concluding his remarks that Szyk's witness rises to the level of prophecy, prophetic as to the Jewish future, but like the prophets of old, carrying a powerful message for all of humanity. Upon his death, Szyk was eulogized by Rabbi Ben-Sion Boxer of Forest Hills, Queens, for whom Szyk had created the monumental, now iconic, Holy Ark at his synagogue. He remembered Szyk as, and I quote, "more than a great artist. He was a great man, a champion of justice, a fearless warrior in the cause of every humanitarian endeavor." A contemporary of Szyk's, Polish-American art painter Lionel Rees, wrote about his colleague shortly after his death. If Arthur Szyk, and I quote, were merely known for his illuminations, one might believe that as a gifted miniaturist, he lives secluded in a monk's cell confined in an ivory tower. But when one knows of his energy and zeal spent in Jewish and world causes and remembers him in the thick of the battle, fighting against the Nazi terror with his powerful and vitriolic cartoons, one deeply regrets the loss of his spirit, so vital a fighter for Jewish as well as human ideals. And to this, United States District Judge Simon Rifkin added, the Arthur Szyk whom the world knows, the Arthur Szyk of the wondrous color, of the beautiful design, that Arthur Szyk whom the world mourns today, he is not dead at all. How can he be when the Arthur Szyk who is known to mankind lives and is immortal and will remain immortal as long as the love of truth and beauty prevails among mankind? And from just two more thinkers, I share their thoughts in conclusion. Rabbi Mortimer Cohn, for whom Szyk illustrated his pathways through the Bible used for so many years in so many Sunday school classrooms, had this to say. In viewing the life and work of Arthur Szyk, one cannot but realize that the great artist must first of all be the great man. The great man is one who lives intensely, feels intensely, and believes intensely, and seeks to serve that which is greater than himself. As such, Arthur Szyk has become, through his dedicated art, the living chalice in which the divine spirit has brewed a rich mixture of passion, conviction, and beauty that brings its elixir of life to the Jewish people and mankind. And finally, I leave you tonight with this thought. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, a luminary, an American thinker, and founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, who lived to more than 100 years old, and whom the New York Times once called a towering figure in the history of Judaism, had known Szyk for only a few months before the artist died. In his diary, Kaplan wrote of their meetings, and I quote, I consider Arthur Szyk among the greatest in our generation, and certainly among our people. In all the years of my life, I have not met a man, I have not met a person of such moral and artistic stature. He is so abounding, so gifted, and so genial that I, for one, would keep silent and hear what he has to say. End quote. My friends, let us all hear what Arthur Szyk has to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irvin, for that presentation. I think if you want to go ahead and leave this image up, you totally can. Oh, there we go. All right. So we do have questions coming in from the audience, and please do feel free to keep putting questions in. We still have a lot of time left in this session, so feel free. But I do want to start with a question that came in actually pretty early into your presentation. So a large Arthur Szyk work, the Aron Kodesh, in the form of a Torah breastplate in the Forest Hills Jewish Center, is endangered due to the imminent demolition of the building. Are you aware of it? And I'm going to change this question a little bit. Is it going to find a new home? And do you know like what's going to happen to the work?
Sure. Yes, I am well aware of it. I've been in touch with the Forest Hills Jewish Center, at least for the past decade, really, about the Ark. And about what their plans were to sell the building, which I believe has been sold, although it's not quite sure when the Forest Hills Jewish Center will be moving, probably when they find a new building. And yes, there are attempts to try to place the almost 30-foot high arc, which is, and the Forest Hills Jewish Center is working towards that. They are hopeful that a museum or an institution will take it, and there is interest. And so I'm hopeful that that will come to fruition. And but yes, well aware of it. It's been publicized that that the Forest Hills Jewish Center will be moving, and the synagogue, while it's sold the building, has not sold the ark. The ark remains to be placed where it would be most appropriate. And yes, there is interest in the rescuing of the ark.
Thank you. So I believe, if I am remembering correctly, you said that Szyk went to France in 1921. I don't know if that was directly from Poland or not.
Is that the
So,
question?
well, yes, that's part of it. But also, can you tell us why he didn't remain in Poland, and why he chose to leave?
Well, he left. World War I was over. You know, after World War I, there was still another war that Poland had to fight, which was against the Soviet Union. And as I mentioned, Szyk served in the army, became an officer, then eventually became the director of art propaganda. Imagine a Jew, the head of Polish propaganda. Nonetheless, I think he thought that that was in the best interest of his career, and so that's why he set off for France. He had been there as a student from 1910 to 1913, where he studied. Well, he really never went to school. The time that he was in France for that 3.5, almost 4 year period, we found records that indicated that he had gone to about 12 classes in about 3.5 years at the Académie Julienne. But in any case, it was in his best, and he went in 1910 as a student, as a 14, 15-year-old or 16-year-old. He went there then with the blessing of his family that ran a textile mill, and he went off there and stayed there then. And I guess he felt that there was enough draw to bring him back there. And of course, when he went to Paris, some of the most expensive illustrated books in Paris in the 20s were by Arthur Szyk, and more about that in my other talks. But I believe that's where he thought it would be best for his career.
Thank you.
But he traveled back and forth to Poland during that time, and also had distinguished guests who would visit him from Poland. But I want to hold that into abeyance till my next talk to talk about them.
Sure. And I'll just kind of use that to remind people those of you who are watching that there will be other parts of this series. And I just saw another question come in about when those are. So the next class is in 2 weeks on March 11th, and it'll be every 2 weeks until April 8th will be the last class. And these will be accessible to view afterwards through the museum's YouTube channel. So I'll repeat all that at the end, but just as a little reminder for everyone. So this is actually a question I was wondering a bit about as well. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and read it as written. How do we reconcile Szyk's humanitarian inclinations with certain racially charged depictions in his art, particularly the propaganda pieces? Should we criticize Szyk for these depictions, or should we ascribe them to the necessities of propaganda creation and the social norms of the age?
Yep. Well, it was war. I mean, it was war. And in war, one tends to demonize the enemy. If they're full, and that is a powerful tool in motivating America, motivating the Allies, motivating the servicemen and women to fight. And what you will find is that propaganda during war times will do that. Unfortunately, there's anti-Semitic and anti-racist as racist caricatures in peacetime as well, but in wartime, it was fair game. And one needs to look at that within the context in which the art was created. Were one to just simply show a cover from Collier's magazine, it would show a Japanese kamikaze playing as a bat, as a ferocious bat, or distorted features. That's what caricature and cartoon does. And it was certainly that which was employed. I mean, Szyk saw himself as a soldier in art. He had to fight the enemy. And the way in which you fought the enemy was to make caricatures and with gross depictions, which look racist and are racist. But they are used to motivate those who are fighting on behalf of good to fight that. I mean, I may say in another talk, maybe I can say it now. There's a Japanese professor professor of history in Tokyo, who wrote a book about Arthur Szyk's caricatures and felt that those racist characters are necessary. He wrote this a few years ago for the Japanese public, feeling that the Japanese public needed to see these racist caricatures because their people, their leaders were racist. And keep in mind that the Japanese themselves killed, I don't know, between 10 to 30 million Chinese and other Asian peoples. I'm not sure what the exact number is or if anyone really knows, but this Japanese professor felt that it was necessary for the Japanese population to see Szyk's art as a mirror, almost to see themselves in terms of what they were like, what their leaders were like, what their people were like. Not all people, but the masses in terms of World War II. So I would say that kind of propaganda was considered fair game during a time of war.
Okay. So sorry, there's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm just trying to sort through them as they come. I think this is an easy one for you to answer, maybe. Is there a comprehensive catalog of Szyk's work?
There is no catalog raisonné, and I might tell you part of the reason for that is I guess in terms of my own work, I would have to be willing to take on the thousands and thousands of works that Arthur Szyk created during his life and create them. What there are books that have several hundred of his works of art in. Soldier in Art, Arthur Szyk's Soldier in Art is one of them. The book that I referenced, Arthur Szyk Preserved, while it does not have pictures of all of the works of art of institutional collections of original art, lists some 670 Szyk works that are known to be in more than 30 institutions worldwide. And there you can see a complete listing of all of those works in that book. But there is no one, there are not a set of books, volumes that would be devoted to it. But give me a call, email me if you want to get involved in the project. If there's a number of people involved in the project, who knows? But I have access to thousands of those images and hope that they'll become available to the public at some particular point, but I don't know if that'll be in a catalog raisonné.
Thank you. So I don't know if you're going to get to this in any of the future classes, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. But did Szyk create artwork about his hometown of Lodz?
Well, of course, there are coats of arms of Lodz. He has things to say about his growing up there, which he was very fond of, by the way, even though the streets might have been dusty and it might have been dark and, a lot of factories in Lodz. But he was very fond of that city. Pictures of the city itself, if they served a specific goal that he had in mind, nothing's coming to mind right at the second, but I do. You'll find caricatures of people, but they're caricatures of people at a cemetery or talking about the living conditions, but not where he drew houses or furniture. I mean, it wouldn't have been the kind of art that he would have done unless it served some purpose. Although he did create art for illustrated books that were part of the illustrations, just simply to illustrate books, but not with any particular purpose in mind.
And I think that kind of leads us into another question that came in a bit. Can you tell us a bit more about his family background?
Yeah. It's believed on his mother's side, I think his mother's side, that he was descended from the great Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller. We don't know, a 16th, 17th century rabbi, scholar who there's much more to be said about Lipman Heller, but I'll just keep it brief here. He married a woman, Julia Lickerman. We know well what her family tree is. There's an extensive Lickerman family tree that's out there of all the people from whom they're descended and have branched out. But there is one great puzzle here that I really want to add to mention in my attempt to gather every bit of information that I can about Arthur Szyk. One of the great mysteries, I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but I'll say it anyhow, because it's what I'm thinking of right now. One of the great mysteries is where he got his Jewish education, meaning we know that he went to trade schools, and we know which schools he went to. But we don't know of any teacher that he had, any rabbi who maybe came to the home. He did not go to any Talmud Torah. And when we get to the lecture about the Haggadah and you get to look at his Hebrew script and you see that in other works of art, you wonder, where did he learn this? It's not unusual that he learned Hebrew script. After all, he did write in Arabic and he did write in Chinese, and extensively in Arabic for his illustrated Arabian Nights entertainments. But he wrote with feeling, and I have a story which I will share later, but not now, about his Hebrew calligraphy. But nonetheless, we don't know who his teachers were, and we don't know where it came from. Perhaps, like so many who learned the narratives of Moses and David, and in their youth, stories told to them by their mother, by one's mother, and in the household, that these stories may have been passed on, may have created this inspiration for a young Arthur Szyk. His Jewish inspiration. He did visit Palestine for the first and only time in 1910. And he was there. I'm sorry. He visited Palestine in 1910. He returned, and then later he went to school in Paris. So he had been there as a young man, searching for some. No, not 1910. Sorry. He went to Palestine in 1914. It's just a matter of getting my dates right. He went there in 1914 with a group of Polish writers and artists, a small group, and was there for about 6 months. So he had visited there once during his lifetime.
Thank you. So we have a lot of people who are actually asking, and if you feel okay talking about this, sort of how you became interested in Arthur Szyk and how you got started in this kind of journey with him.
Okay, I don't mind talking about it all, but you need a lot of time for this. But I'm going to make it short.
We have 20 minutes, exactly.
No, I'm going to make it really brief. I needed gifts in 1975 for people in my wedding party. So I just finished rabbinical school. I was in my first year of serving in a pulpit in Forest Hills, and needed gifts for people in my wedding party. So I went to Block's bookstore, which at the time, in the West Side, I think, it was largest Judaica bookstore in the United States. And I went there and I saw reproductions of Szyk's Haggadah, because it was first printed in 1940, then it was reproduced, and I saw reproductions, and I bought them as gifts for people at my wedding party. Then I was in a rabbinate for 13 years, didn't think about Szyk. Then I went into the antiquarian book world. I saw Szyk art again in an antique shop, and I said, this is the same colors, this is the same style as what I had seen 13 years ago. And then quickly after, I saw there was an illustrated book by him of the New Order, which had anti-Nazi art, caricatures and cartoons, but called the New Order. And I love that idea that here was an artist, a Jewish artist, was so involved in religious and Jewish things, but also interested in politics. And And I thought, well, the art and politics doesn't mix, but it does. I mean, the Bible, I mean, I guess if you look at the Bible, one could say that's also a political document as well, but what's right, what's wrong, how to behave, how to conduct oneself. And I felt that Szyk, in a sense, visually articulated what my own value system was as a Jew, which was, basically care about yourself, like Hillel said, if I'm not for myself, it will be for me. But then, you know, if I'm only for myself, what am I? And Szyk used the best of his value system, as a Jew, to be an advocate for humanity, and that combined with all the things that continue to evolve kept strengthening my idea that yes, I want to really devote myself to making it once famous. And you saw these quotes in the beginning of my talk. This man was famous in his lifetime. Really, I mean, I don't know if I can say it. Maybe one of the most famous artists in the world, but virtually forgotten after he died, which is a great question. Like, why was he forgotten? But we can get to that at another point. But he was famous and virtually forgotten. And I decided, I'll make it my mission to try to revive this once famous artist and try to make him more well-known and famous in our own day. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So we have a couple more questions that have come in. So much of what you showed is in the form of medieval illuminated manuscripts, which Szyk brilliantly used to express modern ideas. What led him in that direction, given that he was in Paris at a time when it was sort of the center of modern art? Why did he
Great question. It's a great question. Abstract modernism and abstracts was the fold, and Szyk went against the grain. I mean, who in Paris was doing illuminated manuscripts? It's a great question. But I think that he was drawn to them because illumination, in the sense, or illuminated manuscript, you're illuminating a text, you're giving light to the text, you're explicating, you're explaining it. And Szyk and illuminated manuscripts was a clear message. And Szyk always wanted to deliver something that could be understood, that wouldn't be confused, and abstract art wouldn't do it for him. So I think the reason he gravitated toward illuminated manuscripts because he wanted to illuminate ideas. And he wanted people to be able to clearly understand that. And I think that's what drew him to that as a miniaturist. I mean, I didn't, but his artwork was only, maybe 9 inches high by 6 inches wide, or some were larger, or some were 5 by 7 inches. They're small, pen and ink drawings on paper, watercolors and gouache on paper, never in oils and never on canvas. So I think that was the reason, because an illuminated text one could be pretty clear about what you wanted to say by doing it. So he was illustrating texts. Then, but he had, assimilated other styles and other techniques. People say Persian miniatures, Polish and Slavic folk art, art from the 1920s, and looking for a Zionist form of art when he went, and may have even taught at the Bezalel School when he was there in 1914. But when you see Szyk's art, what you come to realize is that you'll never confuse, once you've seen it, you'll never confuse his art with someone else. He's.
Thank you. So we have one last question. I mean, we do have 15 more minutes if anybody wants to send in additional ones, but
with this, it's okay.
But if not, that's okay. This person is wondering if you've come across any forgeries of Szyk's works.
Yeah, the answer is yes, I have. And I maintained 4 thick binders. And thick, I mean 3-inch binders or 4-inch binders of forgeries of Szyk's work. The answer is yes. Why they were forged, I really don't know. But when a biographer of Arthur Szyk, Joseph Ansel, was alive, Joe and I used to discuss these forgeries as I did with his daughter regularly. But any person who's come to work for me, and if someone's worked for me for 6 months, you can see an Arthur Szyk, another work, and know right away whether it's by Szyk or not. And there are, and unfortunately they do appear at auction, and they appear other places, even though I'll call the auction house sometimes and I'll tell them, but I sure generally can't follow all that. But the answer is yes. And they came in the form of mostly religious subject matter and holidays. But there are forgeries in other areas as well. They're easy to spot if you've been looking and following Szyk's art. By the way, someone asked the question, where could you see more of Arthur Szyk art? There is a website called Art Store, ARTSTOR. It sort of has a sister or brother named JSTOR, JSTOR. And for those who are in the educational world, whether they're teachers, students, high school, college, post-grad, you can have immediate access to that and see 500 Szyk images, all with descriptions, which my staff and I posted there. So there's 500 images there that are there for people to be able to use. And when, if they're writing books or they're just interested in studying Szyk's art, there's 500 high-res images accessible online. I must say the Wikipedia article also is quite good. It has about 60 or 70 images on it, and I think it's a really good article. So, yeah.
Thank you. So we actually have had a few more questions come in.
People don't want to let me go, huh? Okay.
They don't want to let you go. They want you to stay.
All right. Okay. Okay.
So what type of material did Szyk use to produce his art?
Okay, I referenced it a little bit earlier, but he had pens and brushes, and they were really he just worked in different inks. I know that the inks, wherever he worked, I knew a man in Connecticut when he moved to Connecticut, 1946 to 1951, after he lived in New York the last 5 years of his life. And there, a man that I met, his father was in this art supply business and supplied Arthur Szyk with his colors that he used. But Szyk was using different bottles of ink there than what he was using in Paris or what he was using in Poland, so that it wasn't like he carried the same kind of ink or watercolor with him wherever he went. But he always worked, watercolor and gouache or pen and ink, sometimes colored pencil, and he never worked with a magnifying glass. I talked to his daughter and friends, and he did have a magnifying glass by his desk. So that if people came to watch him work, he'd give them a magnifying glass and say, here, use this to see it. And so I've interviewed people who've told me that. And I once said, I was giving a docent a tour of an exhibit once, and I said, Szyk sometimes worked with a brush with a single hair. And this may have been at the New York Historical Society. I don't remember when the exhibit. This was 2017. I think that's when it happened. And someone very distinguished said in the back, Mr. Unger, that's impossible. I've done a lot of research. No one can paint with a brush with a single hair. And I said, well, thanks for mentioning it, but that's what I believe. And when I got back to California, because I was in New York for quite a while during that exhibit opening, and I got back to California, and I owned at that time, I owned a box, of I think with you I saw it before. I'm not sure exactly when I looked at it, but I owned the box of Szyk's pens and brushes. I owned his original pens and brushes, and I opened the box and I went and I looked just to make sure. And there I saw brushes which were cut down to a single hair, 1 or 2 hairs on brushes. So, if you ask me, how did Arthur Szyk work? Well, I still don't, even with a brush with a single hair, still don't understand how he did it.
Thank you.
How he did what he did in such, minute detail.
Yeah. We had another question. Did Chagall know Szyk, or did they know each other?
Well, I'm sure they must have bumped up against each other in New York. I don't know in Paris that they would have, maybe, but I think they were there same time, or there was an overlap. But in New York, I don't know of any correspondence between the two, but I can tell you that a book that I mentioned in this talk toward the end, of Pathways Through the Bible, which was written by Rabbi Mortimer Cohen from Philadelphia, who's also involved in the Jewish Book Council. But that when it came time for an illustrator, my understanding is that both Szyk and Chagall were being considered to do all the illustrations that appeared in Pathways Through the Bible. Turns out that Rabbi Conan, I guess, the Jewish Publication Society, decided that Szyk should illustrate that book, but Chagall was one of the other two artists being considered for the illustration. So maybe they had some good friendly competition. I don't know. Yeah.
We also, and this might come up
One
in the,
other thing, in
sorry,
my third talk, I'm going to be comparing a work of Chagall and a work of Szyk together. So stay tuned if you want to see that. Yeah.
stay tuned. And this might be another thing to stay tuned for as well. But did Szyk do any Holocaust memorial artwork?
Yes. The answer is yes. And you must attend my third lecture on the Injustice Illuminated, the Holocaust Art of Arthur Szyk. And the answer is yes. But remember, he was creating art during the war. So he was creating art during the war to memorialize events that were happening during the war. For example, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which I showed you, Samson in the Ghetto, with regard to the German students looking at it, that had the inscription to the Sons of Cain. That was done in 1945, while the war was still going on. But that's 2 years after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. But Szyk did another work of art of the Warsaw of the repulsed attack of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to memorialize that, and he did that in 1943, in the very year, and that had been published actually before the war was up. But the answer is he was memorializing both during the war and afterwards, and I'll talk more about that upcoming.
We've also had a few questions about his daughter. You've mentioned that you have a relationship with her, so I think people are wondering if you're okay with sharing how you met her, and also if Szyk has any other descendants that are
Yes.
still around.
Yes. Well, and Alexandra had a brother, George. So Arthur Szyk had two children. George, who fought for the Free French under de Gaulle, and but who died in the late 1950s, I think. And Alexandra, who died, I don't know, about his daughter about 6 years ago, 5, 6 years ago. And then George had no children, but Alexandra has three daughters, three grown daughters like me, same age, give or take. And then they have children. So yes, there is a Szyk family, and they have followed his art and know of my relationship with their mom and their grandmother. And so yes, Arthur Szyk, that's his family. Yeah. And then how did I meet her? Oh gosh, that's a whole story. Listen, these kind of questions you have to tune in for. You have to get my memoirs when they come out, and I'll tell all of these stories in much more detail. But I was introduced to Alexandra, and at first, I've had to make a living as an antiquarian bookseller and as an art dealer. I wear another cap, which was the scholarly part, because that to me was what really drove me forward. But when she first met me, I was introduced as a dealer, and that was not so great because after all, oh, watch out, for dealers, her mother had some relationship with dealers after Arthur Szyk died, and that probably didn't go so well. So, but anyhow, I learned from somebody who knew her that if you smile and bring flowers and just get to say, over time, but it was an amazing relationship. I wouldn't trade it. She was such an inspiration to me.
Thank you. So we are getting near the end of our time, so I'm going to just ask sort of the kind of last question that has come in. And I think this is referring to the earlier question that we had about his depictions, and the, racist depictions that he made of Japanese people. Did he ever comment on these depictions or, talk about his reasoning behind them at all?
No, the answer is that, at first he did comment that I drew satirical works of art. but the more I realized my art had to change. I mean, I will refer to this later, so you'll hear this phrase. But Szyk became a hater of hate.
Mm-hmm.
And he hated hate so much that his paintings, his drawings, his caricatures, which I didn't focus on a lot in this talk, but you'll see much more black and white political caricatures, cartoons in other presentations. This was heavy with illuminated manuscripts in this talk, and I understand that, but one has to stick with me and you'll see the whole body of his work. But he did not write descriptions of his works of art. And in my next talk, there is only one work of art that I know of where he wrote a description of, and I'm going to share that in my next presentation. So the answer is he didn't write about it, but he saw them more and more as these caricatures of racist caricatures. He saw these people as beasts and inhuman and who were distorting life and reality and love and life for everyone. And so it was his intention to deal with them, to fight them as a soldier in art.
Well, we are near the end of our time. I'm wondering if you want to give us maybe just a little bit of what the next class is going to be. Just I know it's on our website, but for those who are joining us still.
Yeah, well, the next talk is The Fabric of America through the art of Arthur Szyk. And wow, you're going to learn about his devotion, what he thought of America, but you're going to see it from both sides. And, you know, Szyk basically loved three countries during his lifetime. I think one of them became clear. He loved Poland, the land of his birth, his motherland or fatherland. He did. He hated the anti-Semitism there, and that becomes clear. He loved Israel, which he saw as the land of his people, and he loved America, which he saw as the land of his ideals. And so what you're going to see in this next talk is what he thought about America and how he saw it through the eyes of an immigrant, which is fascinating. Here Szyk arrives in America in 1940 and how he saw the world as an immigrant and what he felt that meant to him and the opportunity that he had. So we're going to learn about that. We're going to see the art that he created. His art was everywhere, and you're going to get a good sense of what it was like for a day in New York in the 1940s, where you saw his art everywhere. So that's going to be part of the opening of this next talk.
Yeah. Well, Irvin, I want to thank you so much for this really excellent first talk in this series. It was really, I learned a lot, and everybody in the chat is saying that they did too. So I want to thank you so much for the time and care you put into this. And I also want to thank everybody who joined us today. It's always a pleasure to have everyone join us. And we hope again that you will join us for the rest of the classes in this series, which are happening every 2 weeks, as I said, until April 8th. So you can sign up for the rest of the classes at the link in the chat. Oh, I'm so sorry. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we hope that you'll consider making a donation to support the museum at mjhnyc.org/support, and also joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events.